"Mom, you're becoming a burden to us," my daughter said on her 40th birthday. Her husband nodded, adding that a retirement home would be the best solution. They discussed my future as if I wasn't even in the room. "Hello and welcome. It means a lot to have you here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Now, let's get into the story." The weight of the small, velvet-lined Cartier box felt heavier than it should. I clutched it in my lap as the Uber turned onto St. Charles Avenue, the grand old oaks forming a canopy over the street. It was for Delilah, for her 40th birthday. Inside was an antique diamond necklace, a delicate spray of platinum and light that had cost me $8,000. She'd pointed it out in a magazine months ago, a casual, greedy comment I'd filed away like I always did. My daughter's wants had a way of becoming my missions. The car stopped outside the imposing pre-war building, its brick facade hiding a world of modern luxury. I paid the driver and walked into the lobby, the cold marble echoing my footsteps. I didn't need to be announced. I was, after all, paying $5,000 a month for the rent on this Garden District penthouse. A secret arrangement, of course. For Preston, Delilah's husband, to save face while he was finding his next big venture. For Delilah to maintain the illusion of success among her friends. They greeted me at the door, their smiles as wide and thin as porcelain veneers. Delilah, my beautiful girl, wrapped her arms around me in a hug that was mostly for show. Preston clapped me on the shoulder, his touch lingering a moment too long. He smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. "Mom, you made it," Delilah chirped, pulling away to look at the box in my hands. Her eyes lit up. She knew. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I handed it to her. She didn't open it. She just placed it on a glass console table next to a vase of lilies that must have cost a fortune. There was no thank you, not yet. Instead, she and Preston exchanged a look. It was a practiced, silent signal. The kind that meant business. The kind that shut me out. "Mom, let's go into the living room," Preston said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "There's something we need to discuss." We sat on a white leather sofa that probably cost more than my first car. The air conditioning was fierce, and I suddenly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. They sat opposite me, leaning forward, a united front. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about the future," Delilah began, twisting a diamond ring on her finger, a ring I'd helped pay for. "Preston's new lifestyle brand. It's about to take off, but we need capital. Serious capital." I nodded slowly, my heart beginning to beat a heavy, tired rhythm. I knew this rhythm. It was the sound of my checkbook opening. The banks require collateral for a business loan of this size. Preston cut in. He was the driving force here. Delilah was the willing accomplice. "And your house? It's the perfect asset. It's paid off, it's in a prime location, and it has significant value." I stared at them. My house. The house on Prytania Street where I'd brought Delilah home from the hospital. The house where my late husband, Robert, had planted the magnolia tree in the front yard the day she was born. The house that held every single memory I cherished. "What are you asking for?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's simple," Delilah said, finally looking me in the eye. Her gaze was cool, appraising. "We need you to sign the house over to us, put it in our names. It's just a formality for the bank, really." A formality. The blood drained from my face. I felt dizzy. "Delilah, that house it's everything I have left. It's my security. It's where your father—" Preston waved a dismissive hand. "We're not going to kick you out, Magnolia. Not right away. But honestly, it's a big place for one person." He then looked at Delilah, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Frankly, Delilah, it would be much simpler if your mom just moved into a nice facility. Something with assisted living. Let us manage her affairs." The room went silent. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I looked at my daughter, my only child, waiting for her to leap to my defense, to scream at him, to tell him how monstrous he sounded, but she didn't. She just avoided my gaze and nodded. "Mom, he's right," she said, her voice flat. "At your age, you shouldn't have to worry about property and taxes. You're becoming a burden to us." Burden. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. It echoed in the vast empty space that had just opened up inside my chest. It was a single word, but it held the weight of a final judgment. I had poured my life, my love, my finances into this child, and my reward was to be labeled an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my back was straight. I looked from my daughter's averted face to my son-in-law's smug one. I saw them for what they were, not family, vultures. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. "Mom, wait, where are you going?" Delilah called out, a hint of panic in her voice. "We haven't finished talking. What about the house?" I didn't turn around. I walked past the glass table, past the unopened Cartier box, a gift for a person who no longer existed. I stepped out into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, sealing me off from the life I had built and the daughter I had lost. My own home felt like a stranger's house when I returned. Every object was a monument to a life that now felt like a lie. The photographs on the mantelpiece, Delilah's gap-toothed school pictures, her graduation from Tulane, her wedding day, they all seemed to mock me. In the kitchen, a homemade chocolate cake sat on the counter, a single unlit candle in the center waiting for a celebration that would never happen. With a surge of cold fury, I picked up the cake stand, walked to the trash can, and scraped the entire thing into the bin. The soft thud it made was deeply, horribly final. I sank into the worn armchair in the living room, the one where I had read her fairy tales every night, the one where I'd held her when she had a fever, where I'd helped her with homework. And I started to remember, not the good times. I started to do the math. When she was 16, she had her heart set on a private boarding school in Switzerland. "All the interesting people go, Mom," she'd pleaded. "It cost $30,000 for 1 year. To pay for it, I took out a second mortgage on this very house. I ate cheap meals for months, but I'd listen to her excited calls from across the ocean and tell myself it was worth it. For her high school graduation, she needed a car. Not just any car, a Mini Cooper, because that's what everyone else was getting. It was $12,000 drained directly from my savings account, money I'd been setting aside for a new roof. I watched her drive away in it, waving, so happy, and I felt a pang of pride that silenced the voice of financial reason. Then came college, Tulane University, a degree in art history. It cost me $150,000. It gutted my retirement fund, the money Robert and I had so carefully saved. She graduated with honors, and I cried at the ceremony, convinced I had given her the world. Her wedding to Preston was an affair held at the Audubon Tea Room. She wanted her dream wedding. That dream cost me $60,000. I paid for the designer dress, the 5-course meal, the open bar. Preston's parents contributed nothing but their condescending smiles. I stood there watching her dance with her new husband, feeling the deep, aching void in my bank account, and told myself this was the last big expense, the start of their independent life together. I was wrong. A year later, they wanted to buy their first condo. They didn't have a down payment. I gave them $80,000, a significant chunk of what Robert had left me. They sold the place 2 years later, and Preston poured the money into some failed tech startup, losing every cent. There was no apology, just an expectation that I would understand. When the twins, Leo and Lily, were born, my role shifted again. I became their full-time, unpaid nanny. Delilah had her charity luncheons to attend and her social life to maintain. I was the one who handled the 2 a.m. feedings, the diaper changes, the trips to the park. I gave up my book club, my travel plans, my peace. My retirement became a second, more demanding career. And for the last year, as Preston found himself, the financial bleeding had become a hemorrhage. The $5,000 a month rent. The credit card bills she'd send me with little notes like, "Could you help with this one, Mom? Things are tight." It was never a question. It was a demand disguised as a request. I sat there in the dark, the ghosts of past transactions swirling around me. The 30,000, the 12,000, the 150,000, the 60,000, the 80,000. The endless, untracked thousands on credit cards and rent. It added up to more than $600,000. $600,000 of sacrifice, of love, of blind devotion. And it had all been erased by a single word: burden. One last thread of hope, thin and frayed, remained. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a cruel slip of the tongue. A mother's heart is a stubborn, foolish thing. The next morning, my hand trembled as I dialed Delilah's number. I just needed to hear her take it back. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp with impatience. "What now, Mom?" There was no warmth, no concern after my abrupt departure, just irritation. Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced my voice to be steady. "Delilah, I need to ask you something. What you said yesterday about me being a burden, did you really mean that?" There was a pause. I could hear Preston's muffled voice in the background, coaching her, feeding her lines. Then Delilah's voice came back, colder than before. "We need to move forward with our lives, and you're holding us back. Your constant hovering is smothering." Smothering. My love, my support, my sacrifices, all twisted into a form of control I had never intended. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was their truth. They saw my generosity as a leash, and now they wanted to be free of it. And me. "I see," I said quietly, and I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I sat in my quiet house and felt the grief of the last 24 hours begin to curdle. It cooled, hardened, and then solidified into something else entirely. It became a cold, clear rage, a resolve as hard and sharp as diamond. For 40 years, my life had revolved around her, her needs, her happiness, her future. I had erased myself, piece by piece, to make more room for her. I had allowed myself to become a resource, a bank, an emotional support system they could tap and drain at will. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my identity. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They saw a 68-year-old woman, a retired college dean, a grieving widow. They saw someone soft, someone pliable, someone they could easily discard. They had forgotten who I was. I had run a college department with a staff of 50 and a multi-million-dollar budget. I had dealt with entitled professors, ambitious administrators, and student crises. They thought I was just a mother. They had no idea I was a strategist. All night I sat at my desk, the one Robert had built for me, and I planned. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I was fueled by a new kind of energy, a purpose I hadn't felt in decades. They wanted me to disappear from their lives. Fine, I would grant their wish, but I would do it on my terms. As the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a profound shift inside me. It was as if a great weight had been lifted. The crushing burden of unreciprocated love was gone. Magnolia, the victim, was dead. The next day, I didn't wear morning clothes. I wore armor. It was a charcoal gray business suit, impeccably tailored, one I hadn't worn since my retirement party. My first stop was the bank. I walked past the friendly tellers and sat down with the branch manager, a man who had known my family for years. I instructed him to close the joint savings account I shared with Delilah, the one I had opened for her, the one I had funded with $30,000 of my own money as a rainy day fund. I had him transfer every last cent into my private account. He didn't ask questions. He just had that sad, knowing look of a man who has seen too many family financial disputes. My second stop was the office of Caldwell and Associates. Mr. Caldwell had been my husband's lawyer and then mine. He was a portly man with a kind face and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted me with a warm hug, but his smile faded when he saw the look on my face. We sat in his leather-bound office, the air smelling of old books and integrity, and I told him everything. I laid out the 40 years of financial support. I told him about the penthouse, the lies, the demand for my house, and then I repeated the words. The two words that had changed everything: assisted living, burden. Mr. Caldwell listened without interruption, his hands steepled on his mahogany desk. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly, his expression hardening from sympathy to outrage. "Magnolia," he said, his voice a low growl, "this is not just disrespect. This is a calculated campaign of financial and emotional exploitation. We must protect you and your legacy." The word "we" was the first real comfort I'd felt in days. For the next 3 hours, we worked. We didn't just make changes, we erected a fortress. We drafted an entirely new will. Delilah and Preston were not just reduced in their inheritance, they were excised completely, their names wiped from the document as if they had never existed. My entire estate, including the house on Prytania Street, was to be placed in a charitable foundation upon my death, a foundation dedicated to supporting young, struggling artists in New Orleans. I had always loved the arts, a passion Delilah had feigned to justify her useless degree. Now my legacy would support real talent, not a lifestyle. Next, we established an irrevocable trust for my grandchildren, Leo and Lily. They would gain access to it on their 25th birthdays, not a day sooner. I appointed Mr. Caldwell as the sole trustee, ensuring that Delilah and Preston could never touch it. Finally, with a stroke of my pen that felt like severing a chain, I signed the document that revoked Delilah's power of attorney over my health and finances. She no longer had any legal claim on me, living or dead. Leaving his office, I felt lighter. The warrior was now armed. That evening, I didn't mourn or rage. I sat at my computer and began to research. I typed one word into the search bar: Charleston, South Carolina, a city of history, beauty, and quiet dignity, a city where no one knew me as Delilah's mother, a place I had always dreamed of seeing, a place to start again. It took 4 days for the phone to ring. I knew it would be her. The caller ID flashed Delilah, and I took a deep, steadying breath before answering. Her voice was pure syrup, a cloying sweetness that was more artificial than any sweetener. "Mommy, darling, I was just thinking of you," she cooed. "Listen, Preston and I have this regatta this weekend. It's an absolute must-attend for his brand networking. I was thinking, could you possibly take the twins? It would be such a lifesaver." Not a word about our last conversation. No apology, no acknowledgement of the chasm that had opened between us. Just an immediate, unthinking return to the old dynamic: Magnolia, the convenient, free-of-charge service provider. "No," I said. My voice was calm, level, and utterly foreign to her ears. The silence on the other end of the line was a shockwave. "What?" she finally stammered. "No, I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" The sweetness was gone, replaced by a sharp edge of disbelief. "Did you make plans or something?" The sarcasm was thick. The idea of me having a life independent of her needs was, to her, a joke. "Yes," I said, and the word felt wonderful. "I have plans to live my own life." I let that sink in for a beat. "Find a babysitter, Delilah." The explosion was immediate. "Are you seriously punishing us over some petty misunderstanding?" she shrieked, her voice rising. "This is so childish, after everything we've done for you." The sheer audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. Instead, I delivered the final blow. "No, Delilah, I'm just honoring your wish. You wanted me to stop being a burden. I'm starting right now." I hung up before she could respond. My heart was pounding, but it was the exhilarating rhythm of a battle won. I had held the line. I had said no. A few minutes later, I dialed another number. Hattie, my closest friend from my old book club. a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had watched my grandchildren more than once when I was exhausted. Hattie had seen the dynamic for years, her knowing glances over the rim of her teacup speaking volumes. I told her everything, from the birthday insult to the phone call I had just ended. I told her my plan. She didn't hesitate. "It's about damn time, Magnolia," she said, her voice fierce with loyalty. "What do you need me to do? I'm in." My lone warrior had just found her accomplice. The week that followed was a master class in clandestine operations, conducted from my quiet, sun-filled living room. While Delilah was likely fuming and trying to hire an expensive weekend nanny, I was dismantling my life with quiet precision. I arranged for movers, a discreet company Hattie recommended, to come on Monday to pack and ship my most cherished belongings to a storage unit in Charleston. My antique furniture, Robert's collection of first edition books, my paintings. The rest I would sell, the most important task I saved for myself. I sat down at my desk and began to write a letter. It was not a letter of anger or of sadness. It was an invoice. Page after page, I detailed 40 years of sacrifice. I listed the tuition for the Swiss boarding school with the date I signed for the second mortgage. I listed the $12,000 for the Mini Cooper, the $150,000 for the Tulane degree, the $60,000 for the wedding, the $80,000 for the condo down payment. I detailed the last year of rent payments and credit card bills. I was meticulous. It came to 15 pages. With the letter, I enclosed official copies of the documents Mr. Caldwell had prepared, the notice of the joint account's closure, the legally executed revocation of the power of attorney, and a copy of my new last will and testament, with a yellow highlighter drawn cleanly through the section where her name used to be. I sealed it all in a thick manila envelope. The letter ended with a single paragraph. "You said you wanted to move forward with your lives, and that I was holding you back. You wanted me to stop being a burden. You wanted me to become nothing more than a memory. Your wish has been granted. I hope your freedom was worth the price." On Monday morning, before the sun had fully risen, Hattie's car pulled into my driveway. I walked out of my house for the last time carrying only a single suitcase. I didn't look back. Hattie drove me to Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport. At the check-in counter, I bought a one-way ticket to Charleston, South Carolina. Before I went to security, I took out my old phone. I powered it down, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in half. I dropped both pieces into a trash can. Hattie gave me a fierce, teary-eyed hug. The plan was set. She would hold on to the manila envelope until Wednesday afternoon. Then she would drive to Delilah's penthouse, feigning panic. She would say she hadn't been able to reach me for days, that she'd gone to my house and found it empty, with only this envelope left for them. She would place my legacy of receipts directly into their greedy hands. As the plane climbed, I looked out the window. The Mississippi Delta spread out below me, a twisting, muddy map of the life I was leaving behind. I felt no sadness, no regret, only the dizzying, intoxicating thrill of absolute freedom. Charleston did not disappoint. It was a city that wore its history with a quiet, unshakable grace. I arrived and checked into a charming, historic home south of Broad Street that I'd found online and rented for a month. The air here was different, thick with the scent of jasmine and salt from the harbor, not the heavy, humid perfume of my past life. I immediately fell in love with its cobblestone streets, the gentle rhythm of the horse-drawn carriages, and the elegant architecture that seemed to whisper stories. This was not a place for ghosts. It was a place for new beginnings. The day after I arrived, I bought a new phone and got a new number. I walked into a small art gallery on Queen Street, and for the first time in my life, I bought something utterly for myself. It was a painting by a local artist, an abstract swirl of blues and greens that reminded me of the ocean. It cost $3,000, and I paid for it without a moment's hesitation, just for the simple reason that it made me happy. I signed up for a course in landscape design at the local college and joined the Charleston Historical Society. I was building a life, not servicing one. On Wednesday afternoon, exactly as planned, I was sitting in a waterfront cafe sipping an iced tea and watching the sailboats glide across the harbor. My new phone buzzed on the table. It was Hattie. "Well?" I asked, my voice steady. I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "Operation Shock and Awe was a resounding success," she said. "They are in a full-blown Category 5 meltdown." She told me how they had read the 15-page letter, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to pure panic. They had started screaming, not at her, but at each other. They had apparently called her a dozen times after she left, their voices a mixture of begging and accusing. The moment they realized the joint account was empty and the power of attorney was revoked was, in Hattie's words, a sight to behold. They weren't grieving a lost mother. They were mourning a closed bank. "They know you're gone, Magnolia," Hattie finished, "and they know the money is gone with you." When I hung up the phone, the corners of my mouth lifted. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it wasn't a polite, strained expression. It was a real, genuine, happy smile. The peace lasted for 2 days. Then, my new phone rang with an unknown Louisiana number. Somehow, Delilah had found me. I let it go to voicemail. A message appeared a moment later, then another and another. The attack came in waves, each one more desperate than the last. The first wave was pleading, "Mom, please, pick up the phone. We made a terrible mistake. We weren't thinking. We need you. The twins miss you so much." I listened to it, my heart a cold, still stone. They needed me. The twins were now a useful bargaining chip. The second wave was threats. "If you don't call me back this instant, I swear I will report you to the police as a missing person. I'll tell them you're unstable, that you've lost your mind. You can't just disappear." Incompetent. The word she had been coached to use. They were already laying the groundwork. The third and final wave was the truth. Raw, unfiltered financial panic. "The bank just sent an overdraft notice for the penthouse account. How are we supposed to pay the rent? What are we supposed to do? You are destroying our lives, our family, all because of your selfish pride." There it was. It was never about me. It was about what I provided. I was not a person. I was a function, a utility that had just been shut off. I took a deep breath and typed out a single, short text message. My only reply, "I am perfectly fine and happy. You received what you wanted. Do not look for me." The response came back in less than 10 seconds, a furious, panicked jumble of words. "What nursing home? You can't do this. We will contest the will." It was the final damning confirmation, the proof that her only concern was the inheritance she now knew she would never receive. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment, and then I pressed the button. I blocked her number. And her husband's. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. 2 weeks later, the war escalated beyond my darkest imaginings. I received a call from a polite but firm woman who identified herself as a social worker with the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services. My blood ran cold. She informed me that a formal complaint had been filed by my son-in-law, Preston. The complaint alleged that I, Magnolia Dupree, was suffering from advanced senile dementia. It claimed I was disoriented, paranoid, and had vanished under circumstances that suggested I was a danger to myself. The official request they had filed with the court was for an emergency hearing to have my daughter, Delilah, appointed as my legal guardian, to gain control of my assets for my own protection. The audacity of it, the sheer calculated cruelty, took my breath away. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was an attempt to legally erase me, to strip me of my autonomy, my sanity, my very identity, and lock me away, all to get their hands on my house and my investments. A hot, white-hot fury rose in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly calm. I thanked the woman for the information and told her my lawyer would be in touch. My very next call was to Mr. Caldwell. When I explained the situation, the professional calm in his voice vanished, replaced by a low, guttural rage that I could feel through the phone. "That is slander, Magnolia. It's a fraudulent claim, and it is a despicable act of elder abuse," he seethed. "We are not just going to fight this. We are going to sue them until they have nothing left to their names." "What do I do?" I asked. "You prove them wrong," he said, his voice now crisp and strategic. "I want you to get a full medical and psychological evaluation from the most reputable diagnostic clinic in Charleston. I want it notarized, certified, and sent to my office overnight. We are going to bury them in the truth." I agreed without hesitation. The next day, I spent 4 hours undergoing a battery of tests: cognitive exams, memory recall, psychological interviews. It was grueling, but I was focused. I was fighting for my life. The results, when they came, were more than a vindication. They were a weapon. The final report stated that I was not only in excellent physical and mental health for a woman my age, but that I possessed exceptional lucidity, foresight, and resolute decision-making capabilities. Mr. Caldwell presented the report to the Louisiana authorities. The case was dismissed within 24 hours. Delilah and Preston were issued a formal warning for filing a false and malicious report. Their attempt to declare me insane had failed spectacularly, and then, just as he had promised, Mr. Caldwell went on the offensive. He filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit on my behalf against Preston and Delilah for slander, defamation of character, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. The experience of being legally declared sane after my own child tried to have me committed had left a permanent mark on me. The anger, cold and clean, needed a place to go. It needed to become something more than just a legal file in Mr. Caldwell's office. It needed a voice. So I sat down at the beautiful antique desk in my Charleston home, and I began to write. I wrote about the Cartier necklace. I wrote about the $60,000 wedding. I wrote about the word burden. I poured 40 years of silent sacrifice and a month of painful liberation onto the page. The result was an essay I titled "The Liberated Mother: How I Reclaimed My Life at 68. On a whim, I sent it to Southern Living, a magazine I'd read for decades. 2 weeks later, an editor called me. They weren't just interested, they were ecstatic. They published it in their next issue. The response was a tidal wave. My story didn't just get comments, it went viral. My inbox was flooded with thousands of emails from women across the country. Women who had paid for their children's divorces. Women who had given up their retirement savings for a son-in-law's failed business. Women who were raising their grandchildren for free. Women who had been called selfish for wanting a life of their own. For the first time, I understood with absolute certainty that I was not alone. My private pain was a public secret shared by millions. My story gave them strength. Their stories gave me a mission. A major New York publisher called and offered me a book deal. One evening, an email arrived from an unknown address. It was from Preston's mother. She had read the article online. Her words were simple and direct. She apologized for her son's behavior, for his greed and his cruelty. She ended the email with a sentence that brought tears to my eyes. I always knew he and Delilah were hunting for money, not building a life of love. It was a small thing, but it was a powerful validation. The whole world didn't think I was crazy. 6 months passed in a flurry of writing and healing. In New Orleans, the consequences of their actions were finally catching up to Delilah and Preston. Without my monthly $5,000 check, they were forced to abandon the lavish Garden District penthouse. They moved into a small, generic apartment in a suburb. The lifestyle brand, deprived of its financial lifeblood, collapsed before it ever truly began. Preston, the great entrepreneur, had to take a mundane 9-to-5 office job. It was a quiet, brutal justice. The lawsuit for slander concluded with a decisive victory. The court ordered Delilah and Preston to pay me $150,000 in damages for the emotional distress and reputational harm they had caused. It was money I knew they didn't have, a debt that would follow them for years. With that chapter closed, I sold my house on Prytania Street. It went for $1.5 million. I said goodbye to the memories, both good and bad, and severed my last major tie to New Orleans. With the proceeds, I bought a beautiful historic home with a sprawling garden in the heart of Charleston and invested the remainder wisely. On my 70th birthday, I sat on my new porch, a financially independent, successful, and deeply respected woman. My book, Not Your Burden, A Mother's Manifesto of Self-Worth, was published that fall. It became an instant New York Times bestseller. I found myself traveling the country, not as a retired dean or a forgotten mother, but as an advocate, speaking at events and inspiring women of all ages to set boundaries, to value their worth, and to never, ever let anyone make them feel like a burden. 2 years later, long after the noise had faded, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me in the clumsy, careful handwriting of a child. I opened it to find a drawing of a smiling woman with gray hair standing next to a house with a big garden. It was from my grandchildren, Leo and Lily. They wrote that their dad had sat them down and told them the whole truth about why I had left. They wrote that they missed me. And then came the sentence that broke me open, that healed the last, deepest wound. "We are proud of our brave grandma," they wrote. "We hope we can visit you one day." I sat in my garden holding their letter, and I cried. Not with the old, familiar grief, but with a new, cleansing joy. I wrote back to them immediately, telling them that my home and my heart would always be open to them when they were old enough to travel on their own. In that moment, I realized the true nature of my victory. By breaking the toxic cycle of entitlement and abuse, I hadn't just saved myself. I'd given my grandchildren a chance to build a healthier future, a future where love wasn't transactional. Now I am 71 years old. I am sitting in my garden in Charleston, the afternoon sun warming my face as I work on my second book. I am surrounded by good friends, my days filled with purpose and peace. I am, for the first time in my adult life, completely and utterly happy. My daughter asked me to disappear, to fade into a memory. I honored her request, but instead of withering away, I was reborn from the ashes of her betrayal, stronger, richer, and freer than I had ever dared to imagine. Thanks for listening. If any part of this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences, share your thoughts below. I value every comment, and if you'd like to join me for more stories, hit like and subscribe. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.